A very warm good evening to all of you on behalf of the AOCN Web Academy. And I welcome you all to this talk in the third season, which is on a very important topic, that is vascular imaging in childhood stroke, what and when. And for this session, we have with us as chairperson a very eminent radiologist and our dear friend, Lieutenant Colonel Priscilla Joshi Madam, who is a professor and head of Department of Radiology at Bharati Vidyapeeth Medical College, Pune. And she has served in the army as a lieutenant colonel, as a graded and classified specialist in Army Medical Corps. She has done her MD from BJ Medical College, Pune, and has been ex-consultant radiologist at Gangaram Delhi, Hinduja Mumbai, and Jahangir in Pune. And her special interest is in pediatric radiology. And as far as I remember, she's already organized 2 pediatric radiology conferences in Pune. And she's also the vice president of Indian Society of Pediatric Radiology. And needless to say, her interest is in pediatric radiology. And she's also been the recipient of Dr. MVK Shetty Oration. So I welcome you, ma'am, as a chair for this very important session. And I hand over to you, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you, Kavita, for the kind introduction. And thank you, AOCN, for inviting me to chair this session. Pediatric stroke is a dramatic disease that requires urgent multidisciplinary competence and approach. In both ischemic and hemorrhagic origin strokes, the radiological approach is very important, and hence this talk as to how to approach this particular condition which is there, so that the management can be accordingly tailored. We have with us a young radiologist, Dr. Shivakant Nalubulu, who's the consultant radiologist at Narayan Health, Bangalore. He's done his MD from Guntur Medical College and has been trained at the City Neuro Center in Hyderabad. He currently is doing exclusively neuro work, neuroimaging, and has a huge interest. He's basically very academically oriented and has given talks at many state and national conferences. So I would like to hand over the mic to Dr. Shivakant to take you ahead on this journey through vascular imaging in childhood stroke. What and when? Shivakant?
Yeah. Hello. Yeah. Thank you, ma'am. Thanks for the introduction and thanks for having me. Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Shivakant from Narayana Health, Bangalore. So today we'll be discussing about the vascular imaging in childhood stroke. When you're talking about vascular structures, we can see the vascular structures in the sulcal spaces in conventional imaging also. And if you are specifically looking at a properly done MR angio, we'll be able to see up to the cortical branches. If you want to see beyond that, we'll not be able to see here. If you want to look at the cellular level, these cortical branches penetrate the brain parenchyma and divide into multiple capillaries supplying the brain parenchyma. And from there, the small capillaries and small venules will start off, which will join together to form larger venules and cortical veins. And if you do an MR venogram, in MR venogram, we'll be able to appreciate the smaller cortical veins, which drain into the superficial venous system as well as the deep venous system. If you want to evaluate this capillary network, we have perfusion studies which can be done so that we'll be able to evaluate this. So when you're talking about vascular structures, it starts from the ICA and vertebral arteries through the vertebral smaller branches and through the capillaries and forming the small venules, ultimately draining through superficial and deep venous system into the IJVs. So it doesn't comprise a single or separate entity, but it integrates into the brain parenchyma also. That is what we need to remember. So childhood stroke is basically 2 types, ischemic and hemorrhages. If in ischemic, there is an occlusion at artery which leads to ischemic changes in the area supplied by that particular artery. Whereas in case of hemorrhagic, there may be a small abnormality in the vascular structures where there can be an aneurysm or a AVM which may rupture, leading to intraparenchymal hemorrhage or subdural or subarachnoid hemorrhages.
Can I interrupt for a minute, Dr. Shivakant? People aren't able to hear you very well. So can you just be a little louder?
Oh, okay.
Carry on. Sorry for the interruption.
Yeah, fine. So when you're talking about childhood stroke, we need to remember 2 things. In case of ischemic stroke, we'll be able to see that there is an occlusion at the artery level and the brain parenchyma will show ischemic changes supplied by that particular artery. When you're talking about hemorrhagic, there may be a small changes in the vascular structures like an aneurysm or AVM. When it ruptured, it gets ruptured into the brain parenchyma, leading to intraparenchymal hemorrhage or subarachnoid hemorrhage. Or sometimes there may be occlusion of the dural sinuses, which leads to increase in the capillary pressure, which is draining area. That may lead to blotchy hemorrhages in the parenchyma. So overall, you are having two things. One is primary effects, which are happening within the vascular structures, and the secondary effects that are happening in the brain parenchyma because of the primary effects. So in order to evaluate these primary and secondary effects, what we have is we have multiple sequences and across different modalities. Basic being the CT brain, and in case of MRI, you have multiple sequences. That is, this is diffusion weighted imaging, then T2, then FLAIR, T1 imaging, or SWIR GRE imaging, where we'll be able to assess the brain parenchyma as well as the vascular structures. If you want to assess the vascular structures exclusively, we have the CT angiogram where we need to give contrast, or without contrast, we can do MR angiogram or MR venography. And you can do invasive procedures like DSA. So these are the investigations where we can exclusively assess the vascular structures. And if you want to look at vessel wall along with the vessel lumen, we have something called vessel wall imaging in MR, which is unique in depicting the vessel wall as well as the lumen abnormalities. And as mentioned previously, we have perfusion to assess the capillary level perfusion. This can be done again along with CT based or MR based. CT based perfusion requires contrast, whereas MR based perfusion can be done with contrast, which is DSC perfusion, or without contrast, which is ASL perfusion. So we do have across many sequences which are unique and which have their own individual capabilities in depicting the abnormalities. So what to decide and when to and what, that is the important question. For example, if a patient walks into your clinic, there may be a few times when you will be able to diagnose without even doing any clinical examination. But many of the times you need to take history and then proceed with some clinical examination, then only you'll be able to come to some reasonable conclusion. It is the same with imaging also. There may be a few times where we'll be able to diagnose by looking at a single image or even a single sequence. But approach is more important than looking at a single sequence. Each of these sequences, they do provide unique understanding about the underlying pathophysiology. So if you develop a proper approach, then using the advanced sequences when and where, it becomes much easier. So in order to do that, so the approach to childhood stroke, majority of the times it will be applying a little bit of logic. But in order to do that, we need to have a fair bit of understanding about the relevant imaging anatomy and also the pathophysiology underlying the different clinical scenarios. When I'm saying relevant imaging anatomy, we should have a good understanding about the vascular anatomy of the arterial system as well as the venous system, then the vascular territories which are supplied by these specific arteries and drained by the veins or superficial or deep venous systems. And we need to know what to look for in different sequences. As we are having many sequences, we should have an idea what to look in each of these sequences. So once you are able to identify or understand these processes, then looking at the cases and connecting the dots becomes much easier. So today we'll be discussing mainly about the approach to imaging with some cases. So we'll discuss the ischemic causes and hemorrhagic causes separately. Coming to the ischemic, so the underlying anatomy, the vascular anatomy of the arterial system. As you can see, the arterial system comprises mainly the anterior circulation and the posterior circulation. Anterior circulation comprised of the ICAs, whereas the posterior circulation by the vertebral arteries. But whenever you are looking at angio images, I feel it is better to look at the source images rather than looking at the reformatted images, so that they'll give a better idea. For example, you can trace individual artery on the source images so that you'll get a better idea about the anatomy. So this is the distal cervical ICA. And as you move superiorly, it is taking a medial bend. This segment is the petrous ICA, where it traverses through the carotid canal in the petrous bone. After the petrous segment, you'll see the cavernous ICA. On either side of the sphenoid bone, you'll get to the cavernous ICA. And this cavernous ICA takes a medial bend at the clinoid process level to become the supraclinoid ICA and the intracranial segment. Once it is in the intracranial segment, it divides ultimately into lateral MCA as well as medial ACA. And further down the line, the MCA branches, as you can see, they lie in the sylvian fissure and the adjacent sulcal spaces. So they supply the lateral surface predominantly, and the ACA branches lie in the interhemispheric fissure. So they'll supply the medial surface predominantly. But before giving these two major divisions, the ICA has few small important branches. In pre-Tesla, we'll be able to appreciate these branches. The first one is the ophthalmic artery. It arises at the clinoid level and enters into the optic canal along with the optic nerve. This assumes importance whenever there is a significant occlusion in the cervical ICA level. Blood flows through the external carotid collaterals and through the ophthalmic artery. It will try to reform the supraclinoid segment of ICA, thereby maintaining the circulation in the brain. So that is why the knowing ophthalmic artery is important. After ophthalmic artery, you can see one more important branch is the PCOM, or posterior communicating artery. So this arises from the supraclinoid segment, goes posteriorly and joins the P1 segment of the posterior cerebral artery. So this is an important communication between the anterior circulation and posterior circulation. That is why remembering and identifying this artery is very important. And after the PCOM, immediately just before bifurcation, there is a small artery which arises. That is the anterior choroidal artery. It supplies some important structures, so we need to remember that also. These are the three major branches which arise from the ICA before bifurcation. And if you look at the posterior circulation, in the beginning, where the vertebral artery takes a turn to enter into the intracranial compartment, this is called as V3 segment of vertebral artery, and the intracranial segments are called as V4 segments. So the two V4 segments of vertebral artery join together in the premedullary system to form the basilar artery. And the basilar artery ascends upwards in the prepontine and intermedullary interpeduncular systems. At the basal systems, it will divide into terminally into two PCS, the posterior cerebral arteries. Similar to the anterior circulation, this posterior circulation also having few small perforator branches which are important to remember. First one is the PICA. PICA, or posterior inferior cerebellar artery, arises from the V4 segment of the vertebral artery. So as you can see, this is the PICA, and on the right side, this is the PICA. So PICA arises from the V4 segment of vertebral artery, and immediately after formation of basilar artery, small perforator is given. That is the ICA. So ICA arises from the proximal basilar artery, whereas PICA arises from the V4 segment of vertebral artery. And after that, distal basilar artery, just before bifurcation into PCAs, there is another small branch is given. That is the superior cerebellar artery. So these are the three branches which arise from the posterior circulation, which are important to remember and observe. And just to make a note, ophthalmic artery, and this is the PCOM, and the anterior choroidal artery, and PICA arising from the V4 segment, and ICA arising from the proximal basilar, and superior cerebellar artery arising from the distal basilar segment. So after that, just a note on the circle of Willis. So this is an important anastomotic network at the basal cistern level. So when you are looking at circle of Willis, it is just important to make a note about the ACOM, that is the anterior communicating artery, which connects the two ACAs, and the PCOM, which connects between the anterior circulation and the posterior circulation. We'll see when we look some other cases regarding the importance of these anastomotic circulations. And regarding the vascular territories again, so as we have seen already, the MCA branches are looking in the lateral Killian fissure and the lateral sulcus spaces, and the ACA branches are in the interhemispheric fissure. So the medial surface is predominantly supplied by the ACA, whereas the lateral surface is predominantly supplied by the MCA. But rather than looking at these images, I thought if you are able to see the cases where the exact territories are involved, then it will be easy to remember. So I just compiled few cases where the exact territories are involved. If you see on the right side, though there are some involvement is there on the left side also, so just remove the, just remember to see only on the right side. If you see, there is involvement of the anterior and lateral temporal lobe. As you proceed, the involvement of insular cortex, the entire frontal lobe and the basal ganglia is involved. There is only sparing of the thalamus as well as the posteromedial temporal and occipital lobes. So this is the classic involvement of entire ICA. So in the higher cuts, the entire frontoparietal lobes are supplied by the ICA. So sparing as parts of thalamus and the posteromedial segments of temporal and occipital lobe, the entire lobe is supplied by the ICA. If you're looking at the ACA territory, as ACA is lying in the interhemispheric fissure, from the origin itself, the medial segments of basifrontal lobe and extending superiorly the cingulate gyrus, this is the superior frontal gyrus. So the superior frontal gyrus and part of middle frontal gyrus is supplied by the ACA. And looking at MCA territory, in the temporal lobe, the anterior half is supplied by the MCA territory. As you proceed superiorly, the insular cortex and the superior and inferior, the basal ganglia, anteriorly half of middle frontal gyrus and inferior frontal gyrus, and posteriorly the temporoparietal lobes. So these are supplied by the MCA territory. And similarly, MCA is mainly having two divisions, the superior and inferior division. So when you're looking at inferior division of MCA territory, it will supply the posterior half of insular cortex. Just remember that in the insular cortex, the posterior half is supplied by the inferior division and the adjacent cortical areas of the parietal lobe, extending superiorly the inferior and superior parietal lobules, perirolanthic areas. These are all supplied by the inferior division, whereas the superior division supplies the superior half of the insular cortex, then the inferior frontal gyrus and half of the middle frontal gyrus. This is supplied by the superior division. In some cases, MCA may have 3 divisions instead of 2. In that case, the middle division will supply the insular cortex and the adjacent cortical areas. So this is about MCA. And similarly, if you look at PCA territory, the posterior aspect of temporal lobe and extending posteromedially into the occipital lobe. So this area is supplied by the PCA territory, and areas within the thalamus are also supplied by the PCA territory. As you can see, the posteromedial aspect of the occipital and temporal lobes are supplied by the PCA territory. And regarding the inferior branches that we have seen, pica is the inferior most branch arising from the V4 segment of vertebral artery. So that will supply the postero-inferior aspect of the cerebellar hemisphere and a small area along the lateral aspect of medulla that is supplied by the pica. And further upwards, the anterior aspect is supplied by the ICA territory. As you can see, this is almost at the medulla level. This is further upward as ICA is arising from the proximal basilar artery. And further upward, the half of vermis is supplied by the superior cerebellar artery. So these are the typical arterial territories in the posterior fossa. Coming to the central core, in the central core, you have some very important structures like the gray matter nuclei. So whenever you see there is an inferior aspect of the central core, if the infarct is starting, restricted diffusion, smaller focus, narrow point, and as you extend superiorly, it is becoming a broader base and extends all the way up to the ventricular margin. This is the classic territory of the lenticulostriate perforator, lateral lenticulostriate perforator arising from the M1 segment. Many times in your clinical practice also, you see gliotic changes in the basal ganglia. So whenever you see gliotic changes in the basal ganglia, just try to see if it is having a narrow or pointed base towards the inferior lateral aspect of the basal ganglia. As you move superiorly, it increases in size, becomes broad base, and extends all the way up to the ventricular margin. If you see this particular pattern, try to see in the coronal images because the orientation of the lenticulostriate arteries is in this manner. So they arise from the M1 segment, extend through the basal ganglia all the way up to the ventricular margin. So when these arteries are involved, you'll get this typical wedge-shaped area of gliosis. When you see this, you can be sure that this is of vascular insult only, nothing but any other metabolic causes or septic causes. They also can cause gliosis, but they do not cause this type of classic distribution. And other perforators, the anterior choroidal artery supplies the posterior limb of internal capsule, smaller areas of genu, and it extends inferiorly into the medial temporal lobe, involving uncus and also small areas of the hippocampus. So this is the anterior choroidal artery. And in the posterior fossa, brainstem is supplied by multiple small perforators. So whenever you are looking at the brainstem infarct, you should see that there is a large paramedian artery which supplies the anterior to posterior extent of brainstem. The rest of the brainstem along the periphery is supplied by the multiple perforators arising from the PCAs as well as basilar artery and the superior cerebellar artery. And ASA territory, anterior spinal artery, almost at the cervicomedullary junction, anterior V-shaped territory is ASA territory, and artery of Percheron is where you see bilateral thalamic infarct along the medial aspect. So these are the typical vascular territories, and you need to have an idea about marginal zones. We have seen about the classical involvement where one artery gets completely occluded, leading to infarct in its particular area. But marginal zones are the zones where the marginal zones are border zones. When the artery gets significantly narrowed, then what it causes is the infarct will be seen in the border zone or marginal zone. They do not fall either in the MCA or in the ACA territory. As you can see, they are falling exactly at the borders of these two arterial territories. So these marginal zones identification is very important because they are caused by significant narrowing of the major vessels, like in Moyamoya disease, or sometimes in the cardioembolic phenomenon. That's why identifying marginal zones is very important. And regarding the Sutcliffe-Willis variant, whenever you're looking at multiple arterial involvement in the imaging, then make sure to look at Sutcliffe-Willis variants also. For example, in this case, as you can see, there is involvement of left MCA territory as well as PCA territory, because this is anterior circulation and this is posterior circulation. You may think of a cardioembolic origin. But if you look at the anatomy of circle of Willis, in this patient, there is a prominent PCOM, and the ICA thrombus, it is extending through the PCOM into the PCA also, leading to infarct in the posterior circulation also. Similarly, in this case, there is a ICA thrombus which is extending into the MCA territory, left ACA territory, and through the ACOM, it has extended into the right side also. So whenever you are looking at multiple arterial infarcts, that is when you need to look at the anatomical variants of the circle of Willis to make sure that there is no common origin, or whether there is a common origin to explain the symptoms. So now we have seen about the anatomy. Now let's look at the pathophysiology of ischemic stroke. So we have seen that there is an occlusion in the artery which leads to ischemic infarct or ischemic changes in the brain parenchyma. So what exactly happens in this ischemic area? When there is an occlusion of artery, there will be loss of blood supply to the area, leading to loss of glucose and loss of ATP. As the ATP gets reduced, the sodium potassium ATPase channel will be blocked, leading to intracellular accumulation of water, that is known as cytotoxic edema. After some time, the cell will swell up and burst out, leading to water accumulation or releasing of the water into the extracellular compartment, that is called as vasogenic edema. And later, this will be cleared by leading to gliosis. These are the changes which are happening in the infarct area. When you are trying to image and when you are trying to assess through the imaging, the earliest changes that we can see on imaging occurs at the cytotoxic edema stage. In order to look these changes, what we have is CT, we have only a single sequence, whereas in case of MRI, we have multiple sequences which can assess different stages of this particular pathophysiology. So when you are looking at CT, imaging appearance of anything on CT depends only on the density. As you can see, the gray matter is looking mildly more, the white matter is slightly hypodense compared to the gray matter, because the density of white matter structures, as I'm pointing here, the anterior limb of internal capsule. So it is approximately 30 Hounsfield units, whereas the density of the gray matter structures is approximately 40. So the density difference between the gray matter and white matter is very less. And as the cytotoxic edema component increases, or the vasogenic edema, the density will further come down, leading to loss of differentiation between the gray and white matter structures. That is the reason for appreciation of disappearing basal ganglia or insular ribbon or blurring of gray-white matter junction. All these signs are based on this particular concept. So when you are looking at CT, so just when you are looking at CT, you have 5 mm cuts, then you have thin cuts, and better to top it with the angiogram images. When you are suspecting a stroke, it is always better to do an angiogram instead of a plain CT brain. So when you are assessing the 5 mm cuts, initially look at the brain window settings and try to see if there is any abnormality, if you are able to appreciate any blurring of the gray-white matter junction or disappearance or the differentiation between the gray and white matter. If you are not able to make it out clearly, try to adjust the window setting so that the differentiation becomes a little better, so that you will be able to appreciate the abnormality a little better. And when the vascular structures, always try to follow the vascular structures in thin sections, because in thick sections, sometimes it may give artifactual bright signal because of partial volume effect. But in thin sections, that too, when you continuously look for the vascular structures, if it is showing hyperdensity, that indicates thrombus in the particular vessel. And when you do angiography, again follow the same artery so that there is a filling defect is present, and follow the arterial branches all the way up to the cortical surface wherever there is no evidence of any flow in the vascular structures. But once you complete your analysis of the vessels, then try to adjust the window settings again to the parenchyma so that you'll be able to appreciate it in a much better way. So compared to the plain 5 mm imaging, you'll be able to appreciate it in a much better way here, that this entire area is showing significant hypodensity, and the gray-white matter differentiation is also not seen. Even in the anterior basal ganglia, the head of cardiac nucleus and the putamen will not be differentiated from the anterior limb of internal capsule or the external capsule. So make use of the available CT images by adjusting the window settings. Just to show you another case where there is a 10-year-old male with known case of PHD and right hemiparesis. If you look in the plain 5 mm cuts, again, I'm not able to appreciate much of abnormality in this area. But by adjusting the contrast, I'm able to see that though the differentiation between the gray and white matter is slightly mentioned, still I'm not able to appreciate significant loss of gray white matter junction. But this case having a thrombus in the M1 segment, and after adjusting the contrast in the post contrast images, here you are able to see very clearly that this entire area is showing significant hypodensity compared to the right side. Here the gray white matter differentiation you are able to see, whereas the left side it is lost. That is important to appreciate. Whereas when you're looking at MRI, you have multiple sequences. You don't need to adjust the contrast or anything, but you need to have an idea what to look in these different sequences. So these are the basic sequences that needs to be done in every stroke case: diffusion, T2 axial, flare, SWI or GRE, then angio or venogram. And there are some additional sequences which may be done in some specific cases, T1 and Fiesta or post-contrast imaging. And some advanced imaging like perfusion imaging or vessel wall imaging is required in specific cases. So we'll just try to look at the cases and try to see what the abnormality is. So this is a case where 12-year-old male who presented with the left upper and lower limb weakness, and he's also known case of underlying heart disease. So when you're looking at the diffusion abnormality and you're looking at diffusion imaging, try to see wherever there is abnormal hyperintense or high signal is present in the diffusion. In the beginning, you may consider this or this to be abnormal, but as they are adjacent to the bony areas and the air spaces, they give artifactual signal. And once you get acclimatized to looking at these artifacts, then you need not worry about those, and you will be able to appreciate the real abnormal signals which are present in the brain parenchyma. So when you are appreciating any restricted diffusion, in the beginning, it is again better to look at the ADC also to confirm whether it is restricted diffusion or artifactual T2 shine through. But once you get enough experience, you'll be able to see that whether it is restriction or not in majority of the cases. So the next thing is, whenever you are appreciating any restricted diffusion, try to see whether it is fitting into any vascular territory or not. As in this case, what I can see is there is restricted diffusion involving the insular cortex, the adjacent basal ganglia, inferior basal ganglia, smaller area. As it progresses superiorly, the medial, the caudate nucleus is also involved, extending all the way up to the ventricular margin. The inferior frontal gyrus is involved, and the insular cortex. So this falls like lenticulostriate perforator as well as part of MCA territory involvement. So I'll make a note of that while looking at the diffusion images. Then I'll proceed to the flare imaging. So when you're looking at flare images, the first thing you need to do is go back to the same area where you appreciated signal abnormality on the diffusion images. So here, if you see, I'm not able to appreciate much of any changes in the flare imaging. So that indicates that the flare changes have not yet set in. That means the onset of stroke might be around 6 hours or less than 6 hours. I can see very subtle changes. So as the time of onset progresses, the signal intensity on T2 and flare signals, they will increase. So if you don't appreciate signal changes on flare, you can say that that is definitely within a window or less than 6 hours of age. So that is the first thing you need to look for. And the second thing you should look for is in the same arterial territory, look for the sulcal spaces. As we have seen by looking at the restricted diffusion pattern, we are looking at a right MCA territory. So in the right MCA region, as we can see, there is curvilinear hyperintensities are there in the Sylvian fissure. And as we extend superiorly, even all the way in the sulcal spaces also, I can see some curvilinear hyperintensities. So when you see these curvilinear hyperintensities, they indicate slow flow or thrombus in those vascular branches. So that is important to appreciate. So these two things I'll appreciate. After that, you just look at the rest of the brain parenchyma for any additional findings. And then we'll move to the T2 imaging. So again, when you're looking at T2 imaging, again, same thing, go back to the same area to appreciate any T2 signal changes are there or not. Usually T2 signal changes will lag by a couple of hours to flare imaging. So flare changes will be appreciated first, followed by the T2 signal changes, followed much later by the T1 signal changes. So when you're looking at T2, look for that area. After that, always look for the flow voids. So it is very, very important to appreciate these flow voids. As you can see, this is the flow void of petrous segment of ICA, and this is the ICA, cavernous ICA flow void, and then this is the clinoid and supraclinoid segment of ICA, and these are the MCA flow voids. So up to the supraclinoid segment, I'm able to appreciate the flow voids properly. And here beyond the M1 segment, I'm not able to see much of flow void here. So just make a note of flow voids also when you're looking at T2 imaging. That is very important. And then I'll proceed to the GRE or SWA, whichever is available. And looking at the GRE images also, first I'll go to the vessel in question. as we are looking at the MCA, so when you compare the left MCA and the right MCA, I can clearly see that the right M1 segment is showing significant blooming and irregularity, which is consistent with the thrombus in the M1 segment. Okay. And then after that, I'll see the rest of the brain parenchyma. In the rest of the brain parenchyma, as I can see, the small microhemorrhage is also there in multiple areas that I'll appreciate. And then we'll go to the MR angio. Again, the same thing, MR angio, ideally you are supposed to trace all vessels, but always focus the vessel in the abnormal area first. As we are looking in one particular order where we are able to appreciate some abnormalities in the M1 segment. So as you can see, there is no flow in the M1 segment. Beyond M1, the MCA, there is no flow at all. Whereas the rest of the ICAs or ACA are completely normal. So just to summarize, what we can suggest the underlying pathophysiology is there is a thrombus here. It is showing blooming on GRE, and the rest of the MCA branches are showing slow flow signs on the FLAIR imaging, and there is no thrombus because there is not showing any blooming on GRE. And the infarct is showing the diffusion changes, diffusion or diffusion restriction is there without much of signal changes on the T2 and FLAIR imaging. So that is what we can arrive by looking at in one particular order. So if you look in this particular order in all cases, it will be much more useful to pick up the abnormalities in much more confident way. So when you look at this kind of case, the first thing, even in any case of stroke, the first question that needs to be answered is there any role for acute intervention? That is the first question to be answered. So when you are looking at this, you should always look that is there any large vessel occlusion? When there is a large vessel occlusion, then is there any restricted diffusion? If restricted diffusion is present, you need to look at aspect score. This is a scoring system where 10 points were given to the entire MCA territory, so that how many areas are involved. Or if you're not sure about the aspects, just see whether there is greater than 1/3 of the involved vessel or less than 1/3 of the involved vessel. The next question, are there any T2 FLAIR hyperintensities present? If they are present, they indicate that definitely the onset is more than 6 hours. If it is not present, definitely less than that. And then you should look at the underlying clinical scenario also before taking a call about the acute intervention. So there are many automated softwares now available to analyze the perfusion which is done in the acute stroke cases. In our institute, we use Rapid software. I didn't have any pediatric case, but this is just an adult case just to show you an example where the Rapid software, it will automatically calculate the core as well as the mismatch penumbra and the mismatch volume also it will calculate. But it's better to look at the conventional imaging also rather than blindly going by these values, as the software also can sometimes give erroneous results. Recently, they have introduced aspect score also, where the automated aspects score will be given so that it will make easy for the acute intervention to be done in any case. So even without any of these Rapid or even any other software also, imaging wise, the better candidate for intervention is when you find a large vessel occlusion and there is minimal restriction compared to the area of the artery that is supplied. So good aspect score, and there is no FLAIR or T2 hyperintensity. When these criteria are met, that is a good candidate from the imaging perspective. And again, you need to look from the clinical aspect and the underlying risk factors before taking a call. So once we are able to see this, then we can proceed to the other things. Just for example, another case where the 13-year-old male, this is done a long time back where there was no Rapid or anything. And the plain CT imaging showed there is a hyperdensity within the basilar artery indicating thrombus. And in the post-contrast or angiogram images, the basilar artery is not filling in that area. In the reformatted images showing clearly the distal basilar artery, there is significant narrowing or occlusion. And the MR done immediately showed there is an infarct in the paramedian perforator only. The rest of the basilar artery territories, they are not involved. There is no infarct anywhere else in the PCA territories or in the thalami. And FLAIR showed bright signal, and GRE showed some blooming. MR angio did not show any flow in the basilar artery. So this is definitely and the clinical criteria are also met in this case. So from the imaging perspective, as you can see, this is a very good case. Though there are subtle FLAIR changes are there, but the basilar artery supplies a fairly larger area, and the PCAs and the posterior circulation is entirely dependent. So this is a smaller restricted diffusion compared to the territory. So intervention was done, and the flow was completely restored, and the patient also did not progress into much worsening. He gradually he improved. So whenever you're looking at stroke imaging, the first question will always be to see whether is there any acute intervention is required or not. Once you rule out that possibility, then we can go back to the sequences again to analyze them with a, to understand what the underlying pathophysiology is and what the reason for occlusion or reason for the imaging findings are. So let's look at another case where this is a 4-month-old female presented with seizures. So this was asked for a seizure protocol. So when we done diffusion imaging, so as you can see in the diffusion imaging, what I see is there are multiple foci of restricted diffusion and they are typically wedge shaped. The ICA is completely spared, the posterior parietal and occipital is completely spared. Only the lateral aspects of frontal lobe involved, and in the basal ganglia also some only few small foci are there, but they are exactly falling into territory. But there is not completely complete restriction is present. So when you are looking at this particular appearance where one large vessel looks like the cause for this infarct appearance, always in the diffusion images also try to appreciate in the sulcal spaces or the sinuses also. In this case, there is a small focus of restricted diffusion in the basal systems. So the basal systems where the ICA is dividing into MCA and ACA, that is the same area where we are able to appreciate a small focus of restriction. So before going into the other sequences, I'll just make a note of that. And when I'm looking at the FLAIR sequence, again, as I mentioned, just look at the infarct area first. After looking at the infarct area, carefully look in the same vascular territory which is supplying that particular area. As you can see, compared to the left side, here I can clearly make out a large area of FLAIR hyperintense nodular signal. So that is very important to appreciate. So once I see this kind of FLAIR hyperintensity, then we change the protocol to do some additional contrast imaging and fiesta imaging. So in T2 also it is similar changes were appreciated, and I can clearly see that there is some nodular area of T2 hypointensity is there and no signal changes in the parenchyma. And GRE did not reveal anything, but MR angio, as you can see, the cavernous segment of ICA itself is showing slightly reduced caliber because of the distal occlusion, and the supraclinoid segment here and here the supraclinoid segment, there is significant narrowing in the supraclinoid segment. After that, again the M1 segment is filling. So there is severe narrowing in the supraclinoid segment of the ICA. But what you can see here is, you can clearly see that there is a ACOM is present, which is communicating through the left side ACA. That is why the right ACA is spared completely, because the right ACA in this case is supplied from the left side through the ACOM. Then we have done fiesta imaging. Whenever you are suspecting any granulomatous lesions within the CSF spaces, fiesta is a very, very useful sequence, as you can clearly make out the differentiation between the adjacent CSF and the solid nodular components in the basal systems. So immediately the contrast study also showed there is significant enhancement in the same areas. So there are nodular foci of enhancement in the basal systems exactly at the supraclinoid ICA level, causing significant narrowing of the supraclinoid ICA, leading to artifacts, leading to infarcts in the MCA territory. So this is a proven case of tubercular meningitis, granulomatous meningitis. So meningitis is a very, very important cause of stroke. It should be given adequate importance while looking at the imaging. So in FLAIR images, always try to follow the artery in question, look for the sulcal spaces. In the sulcal spaces, you may see slow flow in the vascular branches, or you can see meningitis exudates also. Keep these two possibilities in mind. Just another companion case where a 6-month-old with vomitings and seizure. This also presented small areas of perforator territory infarct were present. But you can clearly see that the ventricular system is grossly enlarged. You can clearly make it out. And in the T2-weighted imaging, there are two nodules, one in the brainstem as well as in the thalamus. And FLAIR showed significant exudates filling the basal systems and the interpeduncular system along the surface of the brainstem. Everywhere there are exudates are present. And post-contrast imaging showed significant leptomeningeal enhancement as well as the rim enhancement of the nodules also. So when you are looking at infarcts, this is a very easy case to pick up the meningitis component, as there is significant changes are there, ventricular enlargement and hydrocephalus is there, seepage and significant enhancement. Even when there are no definitive signs like this, as in the previous case, it is always important to trace the origin of the artery in question on FLAIR imaging to look for the exudates. If you miss that one, it will lead to devastating complications. It may progress much further and much worsen. So that is one thing we need to keep in mind. Now coming to another interesting imaging scenario. This is a case of a 5-year-old male who fell down from cot and he was normal for few hours. Later he developed left-sided weakness. And this was a 1.5 Tesla imaging done outside. And here we can clearly appreciate there is an infarct in the lenticulostriate perforator territory, the classic appearance. Whenever you see this kind of appearance with this particular history, it is important to appreciate for the GRE changes. In this case, the GRE changes were not there. So we did a CT. In CT, we are able to clearly appreciate there are linear calcifications along the territory of lenticulostriate perforators. In the coronal images, as I have shown previously, the lenticulostriate perforators, they arise from here and extend all the way up to the ventricular margin. And along the course of the lenticulostriate perforators, you can appreciate small linear foci of calcifications. This is classic example of mineralizing microangiopathy. It will always present with the similar history and with exact imaging findings. Whenever you are looking at a pediatric case where only lenticulostriate perforator artery is involved with this kind of history, look in the GRE images to see blooming in those areas. If you're not able to appreciate, then better to get a CT, and the coronal reformats will clearly show this appearance. So this is important to recognize this entity. Another interesting scenario where there is a 4-year-old female. She is a known case of VSD, and she had 2 episodes of right-sided hemiparesis. That was 3 months ago, and the 2 episodes were spaced by 10 days apart. And she had some residual weakness. Now she came for cardiac follow-up and referred to neuro in view of the prior stroke and the MR imaging. So there are chronic infarcts are there. As you can see, there are chronic infarcts in the left paramedian perforator territories as well in smaller territories in the basilar artery territory. These areas are showing chronic changes. And the MR angio showed the left vertebral artery is not showing any flow, whereas the basilar artery is showing significantly narrowed. And the PCS are both supplied by the PCOM. Because there is chronic occlusion of the vertebral and basilar artery, the PCOM became patent and it was taken over. So the posterior circulation is supplied by the PCOM from the ICS itself. But we are looking at what could be the reason for this occlusion, particularly the vertebral artery and basilar significant narrowing and repeated episodes of CVA. In the routine brain imaging, the 3D T1 was done. In the 3D T1, we appreciated that there is a os odontoidum is present. Whenever you see this finding and there is small indentation on the cervicomedullary junction. So appreciating this finding, we did a flexion and extension MR for cervical spine, which clearly showed that there is an os odontoidum, and in the flexion study, there is significant dislocation at the atlantoaxial joint, leading to compression at the cervicomedullary junction. Even the CT also showed similar findings where there is significant movement or significant dislocation at the atlantoaxial joint level, leading to compression on the vertebral arteries, leading to repeated CVAs. In this case, there is a repeated infarcts were present and the left vertebral are already chronically occluded. So this is a classical case of Bow-Hunter syndrome where atlantoaxial dislocation leading to vascular insults in the posterior circulation. So this was later, it was fixation was done, and later there were no further episodes of any worsening. So this is one example where identifying one particular abnormality led to the exact diagnosis. Let's look at another case. So if you look at the diffusion imaging in this case, as I'm showing, so there is anterior temporal lobe, there is some restricted diffusion is there, insular cortex is involved, the inferior frontal gyrus is involved, and there is some area of sparing here. And going superiorly, again, there is involvement of the superior as well as middle frontal gyrus also. And on the opposite side, as I told you, there are small areas of restricted diffusion in the marginal zones. That means on either side of ACA and MCA territories. On the right side also, there are few small areas of restriction in the marginal zone. So when you see this kind of appearance, the first thought that will come to mind is either it could be a cardioembolic phenomenon where multiple arterial territories are involved. So before going to the next sequence, just keep one pathophysiology in mind. And by looking at the T2, flay did not show any significant abnormality. There are flay changes are there, but apart from that, it did not reveal any significant abnormality. But when you are looking at the T2 sequence, as I mentioned in the beginning, always look at the flow voids in the petrous segment as well as cavernous segment. As you can see in the cavernous segment, the narrowing of plovoid is present. But further down the line or superiorly in the splenoid and supraclinoid segment, the ICA plovoids are significantly narrowed, and you will be able to appreciate these multiple small tiny pencil-like collaterals, very thin and linear, curvilinear collaterals are there completely in the basal systems as well as in the interhemispheric fissure. So this is the classical appearance of a moya-moya syndrome. So whenever you see this kind of extensive collaterals with reduced caliber, the next thing you should look for is the angio. In the angio, I can see that. So these are the cavernous segments where the caliber is definitely reduced compared to the basilar artery, and going superiorly, the clinoid and supraclinoid segments, further significant narrowing is there. Almost there is no flow at all in the supraclinoid segments, and multiple small collaterals are present. So this is important to appreciate, and this is a classic example of moya-moya. This case had a known case of thalassemia. It is a secondary moya-moya. But even in the case of primary moya-moya also, so this case was contributed by Dr. Ravi Verma sir from City Neuro Center, Hyderabad, where I worked previously. So this is a primary moya-moya disease where patient presented with acute infarct. In fact, you can see it in the marginal zone predominantly again, and there is significant narrowing in the supraclinoid ICA with secondary narrowing in the proximal ICA. The case I put particularly to show the vessel wall imaging. So when you do vessel wall imaging, in case of moya-moya, it will show circumferential wall thickening and reduction in the caliber of the artery. That is important to appreciate. If you have any doubt, particularly vessel wall imaging can be done routinely. It may not be needed, but if the diagnosis is in doubt, then you can do vessel wall imaging, which will show that there is circumferential wall thickening with reduction in the caliber will be appreciated in the vessel wall imaging. So this is another case of moya-moya, primary moya-moya, where there were already gliotic changes were there in the left MCA territory, and left MCA-SCA bypass was done in this case. And the contrast study, you can clearly see compared to right side, the left side, there is paucity of vascular structures, even on the routine conventional imaging also. But when we do perfusion imaging, particularly the DSC perfusion, we'll be able to quantify the CVV values, how much of blood flow is happening on both sides. And as you can see, compared to right side, the left side, definitely there is reduction in the perfusion value. Because there are already previous gliotic changes are present, even after the bypass, SCA-MCA bypass also, the perfusion values did not improve much. And in another case, there are no significant infarcts are present, but there is significant narrowing at the supraclinoid level. This is also another case where the bilateral SCA-MCA bypass was done, and routine contrast imaging, there is no significant paucity of vascular structures, and perfusion also revealed almost similar perfusion values on both sides. But these perfusion values, they are more useful if you are able to do it in the preoperative phase also. Then in the postoperative, if you do, they will be much more useful rather than doing only in the postoperative period. Now let's look at another case scenario. So in this case, again, there are foci of restricted diffusion in the basal ganglia level. As I progress superiorly, there are very tiny foci or in the anterior marginal zones. Whereas these ones, they look slightly less hyperintense compared to these ones. So they are of more recent and they are of more chronic or subacute changes. In the FLAIR also, I am able to appreciate that there are these cortical restricted diffusion, which I have seen in the diffusion changes. They are showing significant bright signal. And in the basal ganglia also, the FLAIR changes are seen. So they are not in the acute phase, but there are two phases of infarcts are there, and they are present in the marginal zones. So this case was referred from outside again. He has a 12-year-old male with 2 episodes of weakness, which was improved over few hours. And outside MR angio did not reveal much of an abnormality. So it was a 1.5 Tesla. So we repeated in 3T to look for any significant narrowing, as we are looking at particularly the marginal zone infarcts are appreciated. But still, even in the 3T angio also, we are not able to appreciate any significant vessel wall, vessel lumen abnormality. In this case, there is no significant narrowing anywhere in the major arteries. But we have done pre and post contrast vessel wall imaging. So this is post contrast vessel wall imaging. So if you see in the left side, this is the supraclinial segment of ICA dividing into ACA and MCA. As you see, there is no enhancement of the vessel wall on left side, but on the right side, there is definitive vessel wall enhancement exactly at the bifurcation level. The supraclinial ICA, then the MCA as well as the medial segment of ACA. They are showing vessel wall enhancement without much of vessel luminal narrowing. So we consider this to be a possibility of inflammatory type of focal cerebral arteriopathy, but still we're looking for the follow-up. But there is no significant luminal narrowing, and DSA was also done, which did not reveal any further narrowings down the in the cortical branches also. So when you're looking at vessel wall imaging, uh, what you need to remember is in case of moya moya, there will be reduction of the luminal caliber also. Whereas in case of other causes like focal cerebral arteriopathy, the luminal caliber will not be reduced. Only the vessel wall will show abnormality. That is one thing we can use for differentiation. And the next thing I want to mention is whatever that shows restriction, it need not be an infarct. As the famous phrase, all that glitters is not gold. So whatever that shows restriction, diffusion may not be infarct always. So there are many pathologies which can cause restricted diffusion. So it is always important to pay attention to the vascular territories in the question, then the underlying clinical scenario before interpreting any of the imaging sequences. So whenever you see bilateral hippocampal restricted diffusion, you can say confidently that these are seizure-related changes, as bilateral hippocampal restriction is more commonly associated with that. But seizure-related changes can also cause only the cortical changes or cortical restricted diffusion, which sometimes may mimic stroke and cause some discrepancy in the finding. So when you are looking at any cortical restriction also, try to see whether it is fitting into any particular vascular territory. In this case, as you can see, there are some signal changes along the insular cortex and the adjacent parietal lobe, but the occipital lobe is also showing some small areas of restricted diffusion. And this case presented with status, and there are no anatomical variants or any occlusion on MRI angio also, and he recovered completely within 2 days. It was a torch palsy secondary to the seizure. It's not a stroke, so that you need to remember. Or in case of demyelination, this is also very important. For example, the case which I showed just previously, entire pons is showing multiple areas of restriction. So if you remember the vascular territories, the entire pons, it is supplied by multiple perforators from various different arteries. So if the pons entirely is showing restriction, it has to be basilar artery occlusion. And if basilar artery is occluded, there will be some infarct in the other posterior circulation also. And you'll be able to appreciate the signal changes in the basilar artery on T2 or GRE in MRI angiogram. Nothing was seen. So appreciating the same artery, looking for the pathology in different sequences is more useful in ruling out the other causes of stroke. So this was a case of demyelination where there is another focus was there in the lateral aspect of lower medulla also. And it's the vessels are completely normal. By looking at the vascular territories, you'll be able to make a proper diagnosis. Similarly, there are many causes like encephalitis or hypoxic insult or metabolic causes like even mitochondrial abnormalities. They also can cause restricted diffusion. As you can see, they are not arising from, though they are seen as if they are small in the inferior aspect, as you come superiorly, they are not progressing towards the ventricular margin as the caudate nucleus is not at all involved. Only the striatal or putamen is involved. So that is more important to appreciate. So these are not in any vascular territories, bilaterally symmetrical. In these cases, you may not get any doubt because they are bilaterally symmetrical. But even when they are present in unilaterally also, whenever there is restricted diffusion is present, try to look at the vascular territories. That is more important. So we'll just summarize the ischemic stroke before progressing to the hemorrhagic stroke. Just to summarize, always look whether it is fitting into a venivascular territory or not. That is the first question. Then if there are multiple infarcts in different areas, then look for the common origin for to explain all the imaging, all the infarct areas. Is there any anomaly? Is there any ACOM or TCOM patent that ruled out? And always pay attention to the adjacent sulcal spaces or sinuses. Diffusion may also show signal changes in the sinuses or in the sulcal spaces in case of empyema or any sinus thrombosis. So they can be picked up even on diffusion imaging also. So apart from the parenchymal changes, pay attention to the sulcal spaces as well as sinuses also on diffusion imaging. And while looking at the diffusion itself, try to formulate a pathophysiology, which what could be the reason for the restricted diffusion before progressing into the further sequences. And looking at the flare, First, look for the signal changes in the same areas, then look for the sulcal spaces to see any slow flow in the vascular branches. This is a very, very useful sign because the slow flow in the vascular structures, it will give about important information regarding the hemodynamics of the underlying major arteries. That is why it is very important. Also, the exudates in the meningitis, they will be seen as hyperintensities within the sulcal spaces. And look at the rest of the brain for any other pathology, then either consolidate or refine your pathophysiology. And again, same T2 also, look for the signal changes in the same area. Flow voids are better picked up on T2 imaging. So always look for the flow voids on T2, particularly the large flow voids, the ICA and MCA flow voids. Then look at the rest of the brain. And the GRE, first look at the same artery in question, whether there is any thrombus present in the course of the artery. Then look at the other areas. MR angio also, try to trace all the arteries looking at the source images, and more importance should be given to the artery in question, and always be aware of the variants and look for the variants in the MR angiogram images. So it is always important to look at the basic sequences in one particular order, so that at the end of the sequences, you will be able to formulate a pathophysiology which can explain the imaging findings on all sequences. If you are able to do that along with the clinical scenario, then you can be more confident that the diagnosis is accurate. If you have any ambiguous findings which you are not fitting into your pathophysiology, then try to formulate or try to refine your pathophysiology, what else it could be. That is how we used to work. And coming to the advanced sequences like perfusion or vessel wall imaging. So perfusion is more useful in case of acute stroke with large vessel occlusion, and contrast based perfusion is used to quantify. There are many automated softwares are available like Rapid, and ASL imaging gives only CDF maps, and Moya also, it will be much more useful if you are able to do perfusion in pre as well as post bypass surgery, so that you'll be able to evaluate in a better way. Coming to the vessel wall imaging, in Moya cases or focal cerebral arteriopathy, or even in case of vasculitic infarcts, where you are not able to see the definitive exudates, if you are not able to see, in those cases, clinically, if you are suspecting if the patient had some fever and particularly like varicella vasculitis or something, in those cases, we can do vessel wall imaging, which will give a better results. And dissection also, vessel wall imaging, it can detect the flap within the lumen, so that it will be a better imaging modality in these imaging scenarios. Now let's go to the hemorrhagic stroke. So as we have seen about the ischemic, and now in the hemorrhagic stroke, there is a abnormality in the vessel wall endothelium. Either it is an aneurysmal rupture or an AVM rupture, there will be abnormality in the vessel wall which leads to hemorrhage. When you are appreciating hemorrhage, the first thing we should look is location of the hemorrhage. Is it in the only in the subarachnoid compartment or in the subdural compartment, or it is in the intraparenchymal compartment? When it is present only in the subarachnoid compartment, it is more likely to be aneurysmal related. Once you rule out the traumatic causes, I'm saying. So the trauma will be the most common cause with the clinical history and the trauma. Once it is ruled out, if you're looking at the vascular abnormalities, aneurysm more commonly causes few subarachnoid hemorrhage, and sometimes it can cause intraparenchymal bleed also, depending on its location. And the other causes like AV malformations and the CVT, they can cause both intraparenchymal hemorrhage with extension into the adjacent subdural as well as subarachnoid compartment. In pediatric population, the routine aneurysms may not be appreciated or may not be seen commonly, but one type of pathology that you should remember is, again, this case is contributed by Verma sir, and this is a case of Candida sepsis with mycotic aneurysm. So particularly in the pediatric population, with the underlying any fungal infection, even with the tubercular infection also, it can be seen sometimes. So always look for this possibility of mycotic aneurysm. Secondary to the underlying exudates, the vessel wall will weaken, leading to mycotic aneurysm, as in this case. So this is a case of Candida sepsis. So this kind of aneurysms should be looked for in case of pediatric population when you are looking at any underlying infective etiology. So just look at another case where this is a 7-year-old male. He presented with fever initially, then followed by seizure. And the MR was done during the night time. So we are not able to supervise the study. So I'll show you how it affects the imaging quality. So when you're looking at the diffusion imaging, as you can see, I do see that there is some area of restricted diffusion in the cingulate gyrus on the left side, extending superiorly along the corpus callosum, superiorly into the centrum semiovale. So whenever you are appreciating restricted diffusion, one thing I want to tell is, we should look whether it is homogeneously restricted or is there any inhomogeneities. In this case, as you can see, there are some areas of dark signal surrounding the bright or hyperintense areas. So if it is a simple infarct, it will not cause this type of inhomogeneities. Diffusion is also a gradient based sequence, and this kind of inhomogeneities occur whenever there is local inhomogeneities because of the deoxy or oxyhemoglobin content. So whenever you see inhomogeneities within the restricted diffusion, it always remember that it is not a simple ischemic infarct, it is more likely to be hemorrhage. Only hemorrhage will cause this kind of abnormal or signal inhomogeneities in the area. And also this is not particularly fitting into any vascular territory. There is the peripheral, this hypointense rim is there. So make sure to look for these signs before progressing into the next sequence. So looking at that, I'm able to make out that that looks more like a hematoma. And by looking at flare, again, look at the same area. As you can see, there are some fluid levels are also there in the posterior aspect of the hematoma. Surrounding edema is there. The edema component you'll be able to better appreciate on the flare imaging. As the background, the white matter is completely dark, you can clearly see the flare abnormalities. And as I told you, T2 is a very good sequence where you should see for the flow voids. So when looking at the T2, particularly whenever you are looking at any hematoma, always try to look for the flow voids in the adjacent vicinity of the hematoma and also the dural venous sinuses. As you can see, the dural sinus is completely normal. This is the normal appearance for dural sinus. The superior sagittal sinus is normal. But as I come inferiorly, compared to the right side, I do appreciate that there is a small area of small flow void is present along the anterior aspect of the hematoma, which is looking larger than the parent vessel. The ACA branch in the sulcal space is smaller. The branch arising from the same parent one, this is looking slightly larger. So we saw this small abnormality on the T2. So when I was looking at, I'll carefully look for any small abnormal flow void so that before proceeding into the next sequence. So while looking this one, I thought this is a small aneurysm which may lead to the bleeding in this case. And GRE did not reveal any significant abnormality. And the MR angio, again in the MR angio, I'm able to appreciate that there is a small flow void is there at this level, but superiorly it was done only till this level. So MR angiogram usually do not cover the higher frontoparietal cuts. So that is one drawback in routine sequencing. When they are putting the FOV, usually the technician will cut off the superior frontoparietal lobes, as there will be only small perforators will be present. But in cases where there is acute bleed component is present, it is very important to cover the entire area of the abnormality on MR imaging. As it was done in the night and we reviewed it in the morning, we thought it was a small aneurysm. But the DSA showed there is multiple small vascular blush with an early draining vein, which is draining into the superior sagittal sinus. So this is a case of AVM with bleed in the higher left high frontal parietal lobes. So when you are looking at any bleeds, it is very important to look at the MR angiogram images carefully, and it should be covered to the almost to the higher vertex level. So I'll show you another case. This case happened when I was working in the City Neuro Center, where we are used to supervise majority of the studies. And as you can see, this is almost similar to the earlier case. This is also 4-year female. The hemorrhage is present on the right side. And again, the dural sinus is looking normal only. But when you look at the MR angio, this is the initial MR angio planned by the technician, where again the superior frontoparietal lobes are not included in the MR angio FOV. But when we do a complete MR angio, including all the way up to the vertex, we'll be able to clearly appreciate the abnormality. In this case, we can clearly make out that there is a multiple flow voids are there which are draining into the superior sagittal sinus. And apart from MR angiogram images, it is very useful to put a ASL study. ASL is a very, very useful when you are dealing with hematomas, particularly if you're not able to conclude the cause of hematoma in the conventional imaging, where you are not able to appreciate any significant flow voids or the dural sinuses look normal. When you put ASL, the ASL will completely pick up. As you can see, the surrounding hematoma is not having any signal, but the arterial signal in the within this area is definitely picked up. As you know, there will not be this big artery present in the vertex. You can be sure that this is a case of AVM, which was confirmed on the DSA later. So this is how we can supervise the study. Whenever you're looking at a hematoma, make sure to look at the T2 abnormalities as well as MRA should be covered. This is another companion case where a 24-year-old female, I just put it to show the efficacy of ASL. There is a subacute bleed was there in the cerebellar hemisphere, more on the right side. But even on the T2 images, I'm able to appreciate these small flow voids. Compared to left side, there are small flow voids are there in the right side. And gradient is not much useful because the hematoma also giving significant blooming. But ASL clearly picked up the areas of abnormalities. As the hematoma, you can see the hematoma is completely showing the low signal, but the vessels in the particular area will be significantly picked up. This is also another case contributed by my colleague. So the ASL sequence is very, very useful when you have any doubt, particularly in case of hematomas. That is the point I just wanted to convey. So another case, this case just happened a couple of days back. This is a 19-year-old male. He had a prior CVA 6 months back. At that time, it was done outside. Only CT was done, which showed left basal ganglia hemorrhage, and nothing else was done. Not even contrast study was not done. So he came for the further evaluation. And when we did MRI, so what we can see in this case is you can clearly see there is a large gliotic cavity is there with surrounding dense hemosiderin ring. This dark signal is the hemosiderin ring, which is fitting with the late subacute or early chronic hematoma. But whenever you are looking at any chronic or acute hematomas, always look for the flow voids in its vicinity. As I mentioned, as I hope you will be able to appreciate, there is a small flow void present along the anterior aspect of the hematoma. As you proceed superiorly, there is a small draining vein is present. There is a small venous structure is present, which is not there on the opposite side. That is more important. When you have small arteries, small irregularities in normal cases, that can be present. But whenever you are looking at any particular pathology with underlying hematoma on the same side, even a small abnormality is as in this case, is also very, very useful, and it is important to appreciate that abnormality. And these are T2 coronals again. We can see again, as you can see, there is a small curvilinear flow void is there along the anterior aspect, and along the periventricular margin also. On the right side, you are not able to appreciate any larger or larger venules, whereas on the left side, you can clearly appreciate there is a larger flow void. So appreciating these abnormalities is very important. And looking at that abnormality, when you are looking at MRA, if you carefully trace that particular area, though you will look at the other areas also, but tracing that area, I can see that there is lenticulostriate perforators are supplying this area, and there is a small nidus is present along the anterior aspect. From there, a draining vein is starting off, which is draining into the periventricular area, from there into the deep venous system. As you can see on the right side, there is no vein that is being filled up. Because this is an MR angio study, the venous structures, because of the slow flow, they will not pick up any signal. But this particular vein is picking up signal because it is having significant flow from the arterial venous malformation. So you should be able to appreciate these changes once you see any abnormality on T2. So T2 is more useful sequence. Whenever you see any abnormality, trace that particular artery in MR angio. This is again a small case of AVM which has led to the bleed. Contrast also showed similar findings. Now I'll just want to go through quickly about the neonatal period particularly. Recently, we have come across many cases of neonatal causes of hemorrhages. So this is an example where you can see there is linear, subtle, very subtle hypointensities are there in the T2 weighted imaging. But in the SWA imaging, you are able to clearly appreciate they are radiating linear blooming areas are there from the ventricular margin. Here also there are parallel radiating linear foci of blooming, which are extending all the way up to the ventricular margin. So this is a case of engorged or thrombosed deep medullary veins. So these deep medullary veins usually will not be picked up on MR venogram also, as they are too small in caliber. Particularly in the neonatal period, this is a very, very important entity to remember. So in this case, they did not have any bleeds, only there is blooming. So it can be engorged veins or thrombosed deep medullary veins. But another case showed some hemorrhage also, where you can clearly appreciate there is a large right frontal hemorrhage was present. And yeah, the hemorrhage, as you can see, it is radiating towards the ventricular margin. It is radiating towards the ventricular margin, and in the SWA imaging also, you'll be able to appreciate the blooming more towards the ventricular margin focus. So this is a case of thrombosed deep needle vein with the hemorrhage. Majority of the time, they'll present with the neonatal seizures, and the cause for this deep medullary thrombosis is uncertain. But the known causes that needs to be excluded are, one is the sepsis, that is more common, or underlying coagulation abnormalities, or the preterm. Preterm usually causes germinal matrix hemorrhages. I'll show you another case. So this is again another case of thrombosed DVA. As you can see, this looks similar to the previous case of deep medullary vein thrombosis. But what you can clearly see is, on T2 imaging itself, you are able to appreciate there is a large vein here, and there are multiple smaller veins are also appreciated. In the coronal images, you'll be able to see more clearly there are multiple linear, very thin venules are there, which are draining into one larger vein. And SW imaging clearly showed the significant blooming in that area. And these are not parallel to the ventricular surface. All the venules are draining into one single large vein. This is the example of developmental venous anomaly. Usually they will not be any problem, but sometimes they can get thrombosed, leading to hemorrhages also. So this is one more entity that you should remember. And the germinal matrix hemorrhages, they can occur in preterm HIE also. This is the classical location, the cardothalamic groove. Whenever you see germinal matrix hemorrhages, it indicates preterm nature, and the intraventricular bleeds can also be present. So these are some of the spectrum of abnormalities that can be come across in the hemorrhagic neonatal period. Another case, this doesn't require much of telling, because it's obvious that there is a large area of phloid is present. This is vein of Galen. In the MR angio, you can clearly see in the angio itself, the entire structure is filling, the straight sinus is grossly enlarged. But the role of imaging in vein of Galen or anything is, so when you're looking at MR angio images, MR angio, this top MR angio is particularly basically flow related signal. As you can see, the sac is being filled from the left side perforator. The rest of the sac is not showing much of signal, whereas from the left side, you can clearly see the fluid or blood entering into it, the jet you can see. So this is one useful information which is given by the MR angio, which can guide for the treatment further. So this was the later DSA was done, and embolization was done predominantly of the left collaterals. So in 6 months follow-up, it has reduced slightly, but the right side collaterals are still supplying the sac. But left side, as you can see, compared to the previous study, they are not even supplying, they are completely thrombosed. And at 1 year follow-up, there is significant reduction in the sac size. So by looking at the MR angio signal, you'll be able to guide the management or treating interventional neuroradiology. You can tell that the left side are the one which is predominantly supplying, so that they can properly assess the condition in a better way. And just coming to the end of the discussion, small about the venous territories. So when you're looking at a superficial and deep venous system, it is very, very important to remember the venous territories also. Similar to arterial territories, we should remember the venous territories. So the insular cortex acts as a landmark. Above the insular cortex, the entire lateral surfaces, they are completely drained into the superior sagittal sinus with the help of multiple smaller cortical veins, except the central area. So this central area, along with the central core of structures, that is the basal ganglia, thalamus, and immediately the superior centrum semiovale, these areas drain into the deep venous system. And below the Sylvian fissure level, the posterior aspects of temporoparietal lobe, they drain into the transverse sinus. And the inferior or the infratentorial compartment, the cerebellar compartment, they drains through multiple collaterals into the sigmoid sinus. So whenever you appreciate any bleed in any subcortical area, in the anywhere in the subcortical area, it is important to appreciate the dural sinuses in those cases. The draining areas, the draining sinuses should always be assessed. And in MRI, T2 is a very, very good sequence to look for the dural sinuses. Just you need to remember that T2 should always be seen in the perpendicular plane to the direction of the vessel. So for example, if you are assessing the superior sagittal sinus, the perpendicular plane for the anterior 2/3 will be coronal plane. So in coronal plane, the anterior and middle third of superior sagittal sinus will be clearly seen, whereas the posterior third of superior sagittal sinus, the flow is from superior to inferior direction. Perpendicular is the axials. So in axials, the posterior third will be clearly seen. Like that, you need to assess in perpendicular plane. But when you are looking on CT, just remember that the dural sinuses will be having slow flow, and the density of the slow venous flow will be equal to the adjacent gray matter. And in contrast, they'll completely fill up. As the contrast is present in the lumen, the contrast will cause increased density. So the lumen will be completely filled up in the routine cases. So in a case of, again, another case where the 4-month-old female having lethargy, here we can clearly appreciate that the density in the superior sagittal sinus, even the anterior and the posterior also, it is clearly higher in density compared to the adjacent gray matter. And in the post-contrast study, this is not being filled up, whereas the adjacent small cortical veins you are able to appreciate, but the main lumen of the superior sagittal sinus is not being filled up. Whenever you're getting any doubt whether it is thrombus or not, always try to look at the other sinuses also. Try to trace the other sinuses. This is superior sagittal sinus going inferiorly at the trochlea level, and these are the right transverse and left transverse sinus. As you can appreciate, left transverse sinus is showing the filling defect, whereas the right transverse sinus is properly filled with contrast. So this is normal, whereas the left transverse sinus is also abnormal. Like that, you should always look at the other sinuses so that you'll be able to appreciate the pathology in a better way. And looking at the MRI, it is always again important to look T2 in all 3 planes. So the normal sinus, as you can see, I just zoomed up the same image. The normal sinus will look in this fashion with a smooth wall and regular margins. There will not be any irregularity within the lumen or along the borders also. And in the GRE or SWA imaging, you will not see any significant blooming. Only the periphery may show some amount of blooming because of the deoxygenation, but the lumen will not show significant blooming in routine cases. When you are I compiled few images for pathology where there is some abnormalities there in the diffusion itself. So that is why when you are looking at the diffusion itself, you should see not only the parenchyma but also the other areas. This is a subacute thrombus in the superior sagittal sinus without any venous infarct, where you are able to appreciate the pathology in the diffusion images itself. And the subacute stage will cause T1 hyperintensity also. So that is why T1 is useful more in the staging of the pathology rather than confirmation of the pathology. So T1 hyperintensity is seen in subacute phase, whereas the rest of the phases, it is not that much of useful. Whereas T2 again is more useful sequence when you are dealing with dural sinuses. As you can see here, there is significant irregularities there. So the zoomed up version I'll show you. As you can see, this is the normal looking sinus. In the acute phase of the thrombus, though it looks slightly darker, you should not get confused this for a normal flow void. As you can see, it is completely irregular, it is bulky, the margins are completely irregular, and you will be able to appreciate significant blooming in the same area. Then you will not be able to see flow signal in the MR venogram also. Like that, you should not base your opinion solely on a single sequence, but you should look at the other sequences also to confirm the pathology, so that you will be able to come at a reasonable conclusion. As you can see, for comparison, this is the normal sinus in the T2 and in the GRE or SWA. This is the abnormal sinus where significant blooming is present, and the draining cortical veins are also showing significant blooming. T2 appearance will be like this. Just another last case. So this is again a 19-year-old male who had a history of headaches for 3 years, but they didn't come for any medical attention. Only they came recently because now it has progressed to reduced vision also. So when looking at the CT was done, it was a teleradiology case where it was done outside from the peripheries. So in the CT, what I can see is in the sulcal spaces, I can see some curvilinear small areas of vascular structures in multiple areas, not only in the posterior fossa, in the lateral aspects as well, in the quadrigeminal plate system, in the sulcal spaces. I'm able to see everywhere there are multiple prominent flow or vascular structures are seen. This is what I am able to appreciate. And also I see multiple vascular structures in the scalp also. So these are the findings appreciated on the plane. And luckily they have done contrast study also. And in the contrast, what we can clearly appreciate is there are multiple venous channels are also there. And the main superior sagittal sinus, it is not filling properly. The main sinus is replaced with multiple smaller vascular channels. And here also you are able to see the lumen is not being filled at all with contrast. Further downwards, even the transverse sinuses also they are not filling with contrast. This is a case of dural AV fistula secondary to the previous CVT. So once the CVT is not taken proper care, then it may progress into dural AV fistula, where multiple arterial and venous channels will be present. So whenever you see multiple venous and arterial channels, always pay attention to the sinuses, whether they are showing any chronic occlusion. So this is a case of dural AVF. So whenever looking at the hemorrhages, just to summarize, always look at the location of the hemorrhage and then trace the artery which supplies the region. And angio should always try to cover the area of interest. It's better if you can include it till the top. And T2 is very, very good sequence to look for flow voids. Look carefully even for one flow void in the vicinity of hematoma. If it is there compared to opposite side, if it is excess flow voids are present, that area should be further evaluated properly with the MR angio or any other sequences. In doubtful cases, ASL is very useful to look for the underlying vascular or structural abnormalities. So just to summarize everything, you do have multiple sequences, and the additional imaging always is guided by the what you appreciate on the routine imaging findings. If you have a proper approach, by the end of the imaging, you will be able to see one particular pathophysiology. Based on the pathophysiology only, you will be able to use any of the perfusion or vessel wall imaging. So perfusion imaging is more useful in the acute cases, acute stroke cases, to look for the diffusion perfusion mismatch, or in the ASL perfusion to look for the underlying structural abnormalities, and post-op evaluation of Moya. For this one, you need contrast perfusion like DSC perfusion. And vessel wall imaging is more useful in conditions like Moya or focal cerebral arteriopathy, or if you have any vasculitic infarcts or vertebral or any arterial dissection. So these are the cases where the advanced sequences are definitively useful. But this is always guided by the findings on the routine imaging only. That you should keep in mind. So I would like to thank Dr. Ravi Verma sir. Sir has contributed many two important cases. I worked with sir previously in City Neuro Center. I thank sir for that. And another Shushmita is my colleague, and she also contributed one case. I would like to thank Dr. Kavita for giving me this wonderful opportunity. I thank everyone for so late, but thank you everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shiva, and that was a pretty exhaustive talk. And I request Priscilla ma'am to give her expert comments.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Shiva. That was a very exhaustive presentation, and you took us all through routine anatomy, vascular territories, the ischemic strokes and the hemorrhagic strokes. And I think everybody must have really had a wealth of information which they've got from it. And I'm sure it would be useful to them, because pediatric strokes have a very high morbidity and long-term outcome. And half of these surviving patients develop some neurological or cognitive impairment, and just more than a quarter of them develop epilepsy. So it's important to image them right. And like you said, imaging which is done under supervision is always much better than imaging done off working hours. And a lot of these patients are done under sedation. So it's important that the right person is there behind the console supervising these studies to ensure they don't come back to us again. With this, I would like to hand over the proceedings to Kavita. Kavita, do we have time for some questions? Kavita?
Yeah, I think it's quite late for the questions. I think
Okay.
I'll just ask two quick questions. Dr. Shiva, are you okay with it? I think it's been very exhaustive for you too.
Yeah, sorry, ma'am. Even I didn't
So
realize that it was that late. Really
So
sorry
I'll
for that.
just ask two important questions.
Yeah, sure.
When we have these presumed perinatal stroke coming to us, right?
Okay.
They usually come with early handedness or a hemiplegic CP. Is there any use of doing any kind of these vascular studies?
Vascular studies not that useful, ma'am. But as I mentioned already, if you are able to appreciate any vessel abnormality in the routine sequences, like angio showing significant narrowing or T2 showing significant narrowing, in those scenarios, maybe it is useful to put a vessel wall imaging. Apart from that, in routine scenario, it's not that useful. In the chronic
because many a times we find that there may be a secondary narrowing because of the reduced volume on that side.
Exactly. Yes.
Is that true?
Be present. Yes, ma'am. Yeah. Yeah. Once it is chronically occluded, it will lead to significant narrowing, both proximal as well as distal also.
Okay. Another question is, how do we differentiate Moya from vasculitis?
Okay.
I mean, if DSA is not available.
Okay. So moya usually it will cause narrowing of the supraclinoid ICAs, whereas vasculitis, it will cause significant narrowing or multifocal narrowings are more commonly seen with vasculitis. Of the involved territories will be slightly different, and the infarcts also will not be seen only in the marginal zones, rather than depending on the vessel involved. If it is a small vessel vasculitis, they will present with multiple lacunar infarcts in the cortical subcortical areas rather than marginal zone areas. And the imaging also, instead of showing a supraclinoid narrowing, it will show the narrowing in different smaller caliber branches like A2 segments or M2 segments. This will not be seen with moya. Moya will always present with supraclinoid ICA or proximal MCS narrowing. That is one way.
Okay, so you don't need a DSA to differentiate. I mean, the other imaging, as you have taught us so well today, I think they should be sufficient to tell us about it, because we are always worried about doing DSA in younger kids, because of the invasive nature and all those things.
I mean, in doubtful cases where even with conventional imaging, we are not able to tell for sure, in those cases, definitely DSA will be helpful.
Can I put in a thing? I think CT angio would be helpful also here.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah.
Kavita, CT angio may be helpful.
Okay. So I think we'll skip the other questions because they are quite, I think you have answered them, most of them in your talk only. And lots of efforts you have taken. Thank you so much, Shiva. You've really, I mean, all these, I think it's a wealth of information for us. And this will be available on the AOCN website, I think, for the coming so many years for all the students to gain from. And I think even radiology students can also, visit those websites. And we are having these 3 talks. Last one was cranial nerve imaging, and before that was normal maturation. So I think Priscilla ma'am can maybe spread the word for ISPR people also if students are interested. So I think it was an amazing session. Thank you so much, Dr. Shiva, and thank you, Priscilla ma'am, for joining as a chair today. And this was the last talk actually for the pediatric neurologists in this season from the AOCN Web Academy, and what a finale we had today. So thank you very much, both of you. And we have just 2 more talks remaining, which will be on the Fridays, which is mainly for the trainees, the pediatric postgraduates and pediatricians, which will be on what's new in autistic spectrum disorder, which is on 9th of October, and what's new in Duchenne muscular dystrophy, which is on 16th of October. So thank you again, Dr. Shiva. It was a phenomenal and lots of hard work we could see already in your presentation. And thank you, ma'am. Do you want to say anything, Priscilla ma'am?
No, just thank you very much for having me on. It was a pleasure listening to Shiva and seeing the images and the cases and how he dealt with the topic. I think he did a very good job.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah. So thank you very much. Thank you all the participants. I think we had more than 120 participants till so late. So thank you all of you again for joining, and let's meet on the coming Friday. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.